Okay. All right. Can you guys hear me? Okay. All right. Can you guys hear me? Okay. So just a quick thing. All right. Can you guys hear me? Just wanted to remind anyone who wasn't here last time that there is a latency between what I say and then what you guys hear. Okay. So just a quick thing. All right. Can you guys hear me? Just wanted to remind anyone who wasn't here last time that there is a latency between what I say and then what you guys hear. Okay. So just a quick thing. All right. Can you guys hear me? Just wanted to remind anyone who wasn't here last time that there is a latency between what I say and then what you guys hear. So just a quick thing. All right. Can you guys hear me? Just wanted to remind anyone who wasn't here last time that there is a latency between what I say and then what you guys hear. So just a quick thing. All right. Can you guys hear me? Just wanted to remind anyone who wasn't here last time that there is a latency between what I say and then what you guys hear. So just a quick thing. All right. Can you guys hear me? Just wanted to remind anyone who wasn't here last time that there is a latency between what I say and then what you guys hear. Okay, is it better now? I'm hoping it is. Yeah, I don't know if you guys can hear my question, but no, okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so did I repeat what I said before? Okay, all right, so I don't remember exactly what I said, but welcome to the review. Basically, I just want to remind everyone who wasn't here for last session that there is a huge latency between the chat and what I actually see. So basically, it takes time for like what you hear between what I say, what you hear, and then when you type. Takes a bit for me to see. So I will be checking the chat window as we go along, just so that if you guys have any questions, I can make sure to answer those as we go, rather than just kind of, yeah, losing you guys completely in the middle. But just like if it seems like I'm ignoring you, just that's why. So just keep that in mind. Second, I guess I'd like to ask that people kind of keep questions that are like completely unrelated to the question that I'm talking about, and waiting for those at the end. Just because A, I'd like to cover the stuff that people had already asked, and then B, the stuff that I actually prepared for. So I would prefer to, if you're gonna ask me off the cuff questions, that like yeah, basically, I just want to answer questions I'm prepared for, and if you ask me something off the cuff, I may or may not be able to like be confident in my answer. So I'd rather ask you to like copy and paste your question to the discussion board, where like I can answer it and make sure it's 100% correct and that it makes sense, rather than just kind of babbling and then potentially telling you the wrong thing, which would really suck because it's the day before the exam. So I think that's pretty much it. Um, I don't have a ton of pre-prepared questions, so I'll either end it early and go to the discussion board to answer some of your questions, or you can ask some of them and we'll just see how that on the stream and we'll just see how that goes. Um, but yeah, so I'm just gonna get started. Um, yeah, it's already 2019. That's terrifying. Okay, so the first question was from Amiri Oda, and she asked, when you say something is negatively reinforced, as in worrying is negatively reinforced because it can lead to a reduction of anxiety symptoms as per page 109 of the textbook, what exactly does this mean? And then she continues, it says, in the context of worrying, does this mean that through many attempts of worrying over time, the process that worrying becomes the negative reinforcement itself? You learn and develop the process of worrying as a coping strategy against something like anxiety. Um, so if you remove anxiety, the aversive stimulus, by worrying, should you strengthen your adaptive behavior against the aversive stimulus, or does it mean something else? So she says she understands what negative reinforcement is, but is trying to understand it in this particular context. So I thought it would be helpful to just kind of um, I just kind of summarized her question, which is like, how does worry negatively reinforce by a reduction in anxiety symptoms? And then I'm just going to go over like what negative reinforcement is. It is what she said, the removal of an aversive stimuli to increase the rate of a target behavior. So in this case, worry is the target behavior, and the aversive stimuli is anxiety or anxious arousal. So if you're worrying, that tends to like increase your sense of control or your feeling that you can avoid bad things, which does lead to a reduction of anxiety, which then through negative reinforcement results in an increase in the target worrying behavior. So I guess one thing I just want to clarify is that worry is not necessarily mediated by effective coping strategies. So I just want to clarify that, first of all, worrying does not actually necessarily mean that you are avoiding bad things. It does not mean that you're actually more in control. Um, and yeah, as Dr. Weinberg said, doesn't necessarily actually lead to, over the long term, doesn't really lead to a reduction of anxiety, because worry is itself a form of kind of avoidance coping. But basically, the bottom line is just that second bullet point. That's kind of the pipeline of how worry is negatively reinforced in anxiety. Um, so I'm just going to go back to the question, to the chat, and see if that makes sense. And I'm just going to give you guys a couple of seconds to type any questions about that. If you have no questions, you can just say no questions, just so I don't sit here and wait forever. Do do do. I should get some like hold music. Okay, honestly, I'm not, oh, no questions. Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna keep going. Um, so I don't just wait forever. So the next question, oh, so yeah, I guess I just wanted to reiterate this slide that Dr. Weinberg had in her lecture, because I think it's important and probably just a good review. So if you apply a appetitive or desirable stimulus, that's positive reinforcement. If you apply an aversive stimulus, that's positive punishment. If you remove a stimulus that's desirable, that's negative punishment, or what she refers to as time out. I'm not 100% sure what she meant by that, but I assume she just, I've, yeah, I guess you just wanted to clarify like an example, just because it's not necessarily intuitive that timeout is negative punishment, um, because it might seem like you're applying a stimulus when you're really just removing stimuli that might be enjoyable for the child or the person who's in timeout. And then removing an undesired stimulus, as we talked about before, is negative reinforcement. So just generally, reinforcement increases a target behavior, and then punishment decreases the behavior. Um, so yeah, just know this. It's just you probably already do, but I thought I would go over it again just to be safe. So the second question is from Alexandra Makalani, and she asked, "Does okay?" Her question was actually pretty long. I'm not sure if I should read them all out, but um, so she said, in the lecture we talked about learning theory and evolutionary preparedness for theories regarding social specific phobias. In the textbook, there are three theories: classical conditioning, non-associative model, and biological preparedness. Is evolutionary preparedness, as seen as in class, does it fit into the non-associative model or the biological preparedness theory? I'm confused as to where Seligman's theory we saw in class fits into definitions. Okay, that's actually a really good question. And I actually kind of had to do a bit of looking to make sure that I had the right answer. So I'm glad you asked. According to a paper I found, um, the point at which the non-associative models, actually, hang on, I'm just going to quickly go over what non-associative and biological preparedness models are, just for people who may not be aware. So the non-associative model says that we are evolutionarily predisposed to fearing some kinds of stimuli, but we don't require sort of learning to just experience it. And then the biological preparedness model says that we are evolutionary, also says that we're evolutionary predisposed to fear specific situations, but we need associative learning to actually develop the phobia. So, according to the paper I found, and I guess really according to those definitions, the point at which the non-associative model and the biological preparedness model differ is in explaining the etiology of specific phobias, not saying that there's a tendency to respond fearfully to some classes of stimuli and not others. So that is what the Seligman's theory or evolutionary preparedness theory suggests, that we evolved with a sensitivity to certain stimuli that might be dangerous, because those fears or being afraid of certain things was adaptive at some point and was thus selected for. So an example that we covered in class would be like fear of snakes or spiders. But you're not necessarily going to have an evolutionary phobia of, say, flowers or uh, the sun, something like that. Um, so I guess, yeah, the bottom line is that these two models, so Seligman's theory or the evolutionary preparedness theory, um, is involved in both the non-associative and biological preparedness model. They just differ on how they think phobias develop, whether it requires learning or not. Um, so yeah, I'm just gonna go. Oh, okay. Um, Sorry, I just saw XD's question, or they said, but how is worry a negative reinforcement? Are you removing the anxiety? So yes, you're removing some of the anxiety by engaging in worry. So if you worry more, your anxiety decreases. Um, I think- um, so yes, you are lowering the anxiety with worry. And then okay, I'm just gonna wait for questions about Seligman's theory and the biological preparedness stuff. And again, yeah, if you could just tell me there's no questions, I guess, so I don't wait like 10 years. Do do do. I guess I could get some hold music, but that would be kind of weird. Okay, I'm just gonna wait a couple seconds just to make sure, just see if other people are typing about their questions. Okay, I'm just gonna keep going and then I'll try to check just to make sure we don't have any people who are typing. Um, so let's see. So question 3 is from Johnny Nahas, and he asked, let's see, his question was longer than that. He asked, agoraphobia is defined in the textbook as a fear of being in places where it would be difficult to escape, or, wait, hang on, let me see. Yeah. Uh, it'd be difficult to escape or get help if a panic attack were to occur. I'm wondering if a person must fear being able to escape strictly because a panic attack might occur. Is the panic attack component necessarily, or can they just fear places where they wouldn't be able to escape? Okay. Um, so agoraphobia can be diagnosed with or without occurring panic attacks. Um, being unable to escape if one occurs would be an example. Oh, wait, hang on. 1 second. Sorry about this. That is the same question. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to skip to that because I think actually that slide is old and I didn't delete it. Well done, me. Okay, so the DSM, I'm just going to go over the DSM diagnostic criteria. It requires a marked and disproportionate fear when confronted with at least 2 of 5 different situations, and that fear has to be disproportionate to the actual threat. So using public transportation, being in open spaces, being in closed spaces, standing in line or being in a crowd, or being outside the home alone. Um, so these situations are avoided. So like travel is restricted or else are endured with marked distress or with anxiety about having panic attack or panic-like symptoms, or the person requires the presence of a companion. Symptoms recorded for at least 6 months. Across all age groups, and then you also can't have an underlying condition that may explain the symptoms, and obviously has to cause distress and impairment in multiple valences of life. So basically, the bottom line is that the DSM-4 required a fear of panic attacks for agoraphobia diagnosis. So basically, you had to have panic attacks to be diagnosed with agoraphobia, but the DSM-5 does not require panic attack symptoms for diagnosis. So that is a change between the DSM-4 and the DSM-5. So that's a very, very common expression of agoraphobia, and that's really what Dr. Weinberg talked about most in class. However, it is not necessary for diagnosis of agoraphobia in the DSM-5, but the two often co-occur. So I think what I said on the previous slide was slightly different, so please do ignore that and just focus on this. So like the bottom line is like literally what you need to know. Um, Sorry about that. So I'm just gonna go back to the, okay, I'm just gonna wait for questions. I'm sorry again about having the wrong slide for a second there. Um, yeah, what I'm thinking of doing is just link, make a series of time points and then link each question in the description so that people can just check up on the answers rather than having all these weird pauses and stuff. But just, yeah, let me know if you have any questions or if there's no questions. Okay, perfect. I'm gonna keep going. Um, let's see. So question 4 is also from Johnny Nahas, and he asked, to receive a diagnosis of social anxiety disorder, does the person have to fear only one specific type of social situation, such as if someone pathologically fears public speaking only? Or is it the case that they must fear most social situations to receive a diagnosis of social anxiety? But if they fear only one specific type of situation, will they then have performance only phobia, social phobia? And if that is the case, then what is a generalized social phobia? I'm just having a hard time distinguishing social anxiety from performance only social phobia and from generalized social phobia. Okay, that's kind of a confusing question. But basically, I think what he's asking is what is the difference between generalized social phobia and social anxiety disorder? Um, so, yeah, so to answer the first question, just social anxiety disorder, as defined by the DSM, requires excessive anxiety or fear in one or more social situations. Um, uh, um, and then So, since Dr. Weinberg didn't really cover the history of diagnostic criteria of social anxiety disorder, I wouldn't like freak out trying to memorize this, but because it was asked and I thought it was interesting and it might be a little bit confusing with the stuff that's in the textbook, I'm just going to go over what I found. So basically, all these specifiers, so specific social phobia, non-generalized social phobia, and then generalized social phobia, those are all specifiers of what was then called social phobia that were first introduced in the DSM-3R, and then they were removed in the DSM-5. So now you just have, in the DSM-5, you just have social anxiety disorder with the social anxiety disorder diagnostic criteria that we see. And then so none of these things apply. But when it was still called social phobia, you had specific social phobia, which is just one or two public performances are feared, and then non-generalized social phobia, which is more than a few but less than half of social situations are feared, and then generalized social phobia, which is more than half of social situations are feared. So those are specifiers that just fall under um, social phobia in the DSM-3R. So the reason they removed those in the DSM-5 is because that seemed to kind of imply that social phobia or social anxiety disorder is dimensional in nature, and they didn't really like that, so they basically just collapsed them all together and labeled it social anxiety disorder. Um, so basically, I would just have your bottom line just know the social anxiety disorder criteria from the DSM-5, and just try not to get confused about this all the specifiers because they no longer apply. Um, I'm going to check for questions because that's kind of confusing. Um, to answer Emiri's question, yes, it is definitely possible to have a diagnosis of panic disorder and agoraphobia at the same time. In fact, it's very common. Um, you, yeah, um, but those are so in the DSM-4, those were kind of lumped together, but now they are separate disorders. So you can have agoraphobia on its own or panic disorder on its own. Um, and they don't have to co-occur, but they often do. And if it would be possible, like just say you don't have any questions, or I'm just gonna move on and try to check, just so we don't have like huge pauses. Um, Okay, I'm just gonna keep going. Right, so this is actually the last question that we received, and this was something that Bina wasn't able to cover last time. So the question was basically just, can you explain this slide? Um, and that's from, I think that's from lecture 9. Let me see. Yeah, that's from day 9, from generalized anxiety and social anxiety disorder. Um, so the results were pretty much okay. So with regards to the Stroop task, people with social anxiety disorder are slower to name colors with words like stupid or boring. Um, sorry, there should be quotes on either side of stupid and boring, but I messed up. Um, because they're distracted by the words. Um, so they have a harder time allocating attention to other cues. So if you had like letter, like the word cat in green, they would be faster to identify the green color than if you had annoying in green. Then that would take that would take longer because they're paying so much attention to the word annoying that they can't allocate attention to the color of the word. So that's kind of some support for um, theories of social anxiety from the Stroop task. And then, so for the bullet point that says the mixed results of the so with the dot probe task, um, so basically that depends, um, or the results that you get are very mixed. It depends mostly on how long you display the stimuli. So if you display the threatening stimuli extremely briefly, you get vigilance. So that would be extremely quick attention diversion to a threat. But if you display the threatening stimuli for longer, people will actually show avoidance because they're trying to direct their attention away. So basically, if you have if you display the stimuli for a very short period of time, you have a lower reaction time, and thus that's displaying a behavior of vigilance. If you have a longer display time, then you get a higher reaction time, and that's because the person is displaying avoidance by directing their attention away. So I would definitely know that and kind of try to understand that. Yeah, because that'd be an important thing to know. um, so basically, that kind of maps onto the supposed time course of a vigilance avoidance pattern. So like you display an initial quick avoidance, or sorry, a quick vigilance towards threatening stimuli, and then you quickly divert your attention away to avoid it. So the whole idea behind vigilance avoidance is that you display a very short-term attentional bias towards threat, but because of your avoidance, you never fully process the cue itself. And thus you can't really get over your fear because you're not actually fully processing the stimuli because you immediately divert your attention away and avoid it. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how the dot probe task relates to the vigilance avoidance theory, um, and it provides supporting evidence for that theory. So I hope that makes sense. I'm guessing you probably might have questions about that because it is kind of confusing. I'm just gonna check. Okay, so we had a question from the last one. So now generalized social phobia and social anxiety are kind of synonym words. No, um, generalized social phobia. I wouldn't say generalized social phobia. It's just so social phobia and social anxiety disorder are now synonymous. Social anxiety disorder is just the label that we use to describe social phobia. But generalized social phobia. Let's see it. So that means half of your social situations are feared, but if you look at the diagnostic criteria for social anxiety disorder, it's just one or more social situation. So really, Social anxiety disorder in the DSM-5 is really containing anywhere along this like spectrum of specific to generalized, where specific having only one or two situations, and then generalized is like more than half of any of the situations you could be in. All of those are kind of collapsed down because social anxiety only requires one or more. So really, there just are no specifiers anymore. We're lumping everyone together. And then you would just kind of, I guess, maybe code severity of how severe your social anxiety disorder is. But yeah, so I would definitely not say that like generalized social phobia is synonymous with social anxiety disorder, because generalized social phobia is extremely severe, and social anxiety disorder requires fear in only one or more social situations. So like one would be pretty mild. But again, I really wouldn't focus on trying to remember or understand these specifiers, because she didn't really cover them extensively in class. Like if you want to know them, that's good, but don't, that was not really the focus of the course, I guess. Okay, I'm just going to keep waiting for questions. Doo-doo-doo. Okay, so Julianne asked, can you just go over that last question regarding time of display, effects of avoidance, and missing the opportunity to learn that something isn't so bad? Okay, so basically the idea behind vigilance avoidance is that you show an attentional bias towards threat. You show it to okay, sorry, XD just asked, can you give an example? So actually I think that might be a good way to address Julianne's question. So say I'm really afraid of say I'm in a store and I have social anxiety and I am terrified of employees coming up and asking me, have you been helped? What are you looking for? Do you need anything? Which I am, but not to an actual phobic extent. Uh, so if I'm in the store and then all of a sudden I see an employee approaching me and they're holding a basket and they have that face that says they're about to ask me something, like, have you been helped yet? What are you looking for? Can I help you? Um, then I would be quicker than someone else who does not have social anxiety about that situation to detect the threat. So like see that I just like see that employee coming near me and I'm like, oh my God. But then so if that stimuli is presented extremely briefly, you will see that people with with anxiety are quicker to attend to that threat. But then as as the employee keeps coming towards me, then I actually start to avoid it because I'm like, oh my God, I'm so afraid. So I would try to like get away from that situation. So then if you measure it over a longer period, my reaction time might actually be longer, because I'm actively avoiding, like cognitively avoiding, um, the threatening stimuli or the employee. And that's a really bad example actually, just because these things are definitely not conscious. Like it's not that I'm like, hiding behind a display and trying to avoid the employee or anything. Like it's not it's not an explicit cognitive bias. It's just it's implicit. So a more accurate example, but slightly less dramatic or helpful, would be like you're quicker to detect out of the corner of your eye a snake in the grass or something that even looks vaguely like a snake. So your reaction time on like that short time span is much faster, because you're hyper vigilant for snakes or anything that looks like a snake. Um, but then once you actually see it, you actually start to avoid it. So if you measure it over a longer time span, you might actually see a longer reaction time or a slower reaction, because the person is avoiding it or avoiding cognitive processing of it. So I guess to use my bad but more illustrative example, the reason that you miss the opportunity to learn that something isn't so bad, quote unquote, is like, maybe I'm so busy avoiding um, the employee that I never actually like interact with them and learn that you can just say, oh no, thank you, like it's fine, because I avoid it. Or in the better example that's more accurate, like with seeing like a piece of paper in the grass that I think looks like a snake, um, you never actually fully process it. So A, you may not even realize it's not a snake. So you may think that there are more snakes in the grass in the world than there actually are. And then B, you definitely would not actually fully like cognitively process it or experience or go anywhere near it. So you're less likely to attenuate to the threat. Um, because you're not actually processing it. You just have this hypervigilance and then immediately this avoidance, and you never actually have depthful processing that allows you to attenuate or habituate to the threatening stimuli. I know that was a lot, so if you have any follow-up questions, I will wait and try to explain more. I should probably also find my charger because my laptop's running out of battery. Okay, Julianne says thank you, so I hope that made sense to you. If anyone else has any questions about that or anything else that I talked about, because there really were a lot of questions to go over. Okay. Awkward silence. So yeah, I guess I can also open up the floor to any other questions you guys might have. Again, keeping in mind that it might make more sense to just ask them on the discussion board, and then I can make sure I'm giving you like the exact right information rather than just kind of saying something off the cuff and maybe telling you the wrong thing. But since we've only been here for about 40 minutes, I thought I would just open it up and see what people had to ask. Let's see. Um, Also, I guess if you have no questions, you can say no questions, just so I don't sit here. But I am willing to try to answer things or ask you to post them on the discussion. Okay. Okay. Those, the, wait, okay. Okay, sorry. I'm going to answer Mary's question first, just because she's asking about something that I actually prepared for. So, okay, so Mary asked, so going back to my first question about negative reinforcement, worrying is used to remove the aversive stimuli, anxiety, and that process makes you worry even more. So the target behavior is reinforced. So yeah, that's correct. I'm just going to go back to the PowerPoint and maybe just edit it again, just why not? Okay. Yeah, so I guess really the pathway is, so worrying kind of gives you like a sense of control or the feeling that you're able to avoid, or confidence that you're avoiding bad things, which then reduces kind of like your uh, affective or anxious arousal. Um, and then because worrying leads to a reduction of anxiety, which is something that you don't like, then you see an increase of that behavior. So it's negative reinforcement in that you're removing the aversive stimuli of anxiety by applying a behavior, or sorry, you're removing a aversive stimuli, and then that increases the rate of the target behavior. So the more you worry, the less anxiety you feel, and then that leads to an increase, a further increase in worrying behavior. So you kind of end up kind of spiraling out of control a little bit because you're constantly reinforcing your worry. So basically, what you said is completely right, but um, okay, so XD asked other question. Those the GAS general adaptation system syndrome is in the response stimulus transaction. If not, can you differentiate? I assume you mean differentiate them. Um, I'm not 100% sure what you mean. Um, if you could maybe try to clarify. Um, let's see. I can also go to the stress reactivity lecture and see if I can figure out what you mean. I'm sorry. um, this might also be a good question to just post on the discussion board, and I'll literally respond like as soon as I answer end the stream. I just don't want to like A, waste a bunch of time trying to figure it out, and then B, tell you the wrong thing. Um, so actually, yeah, I think that's what I'm gonna do. Just because honestly, I have no idea. So, what you mean? So, if you'd be willing to, yeah, clarify your question on the discussion board, then I will write out like a completely thorough reply, and then you can ask any follow-up questions and I'll respond. But I just don't want to like say something off the cuff and then kind of tell you the wrong thing right before the exam. Um, so are there any other questions? Okay. Uh, and thank you, XD. Sorry about that. I do apologize. I wish I was able to just like answer you, but I'm not sure. So I'm not sure what you mean, and I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm just gonna keep waiting just to see if we have any more questions. Let's see. Um, all right. Um, so I think if no one else has anything, then we're pretty much done. If you do have anything or you think of something last minute, you're welcome to post on the discussion board. I'll try to like monitor that. Um, and then yeah. Um, thank you guys for coming and listening. I hope this was helpful, even though we didn't have a lot to cover, unfortunately. Um, yeah, good luck on the exam tomorrow. yeah, try not to stress out too much. I hope you guys do great. So yeah, see you tomorrow, I guess.